That Stuxnet, I think it was called. That's how the Israelis hacked Iran's nuclear program through leaving some USB sticks around.
They're amazing stories, and I wouldn't question the effectiveness of intelligence services. But
no.
There are people everywhere, and we know that in New Zealand too, we have had cases where some officers left their laptops on the bench, and this and that. So of course we have to be vigilant, and I think. Yes, we have been maybe somewhat naive after the end of the Cold War. We thought, that's it. And we just, export to China, and China will make us rich, but China is not going to come back to us and do what major powers are doing. Watch what we do and watch what our partners do. So I think it's time to give up that naivete, but I also caution against becoming, paranoid about that. It's impossible to follow and watch everyone. I mean, come on, that's unrealistic.
Professor Ruben Azizian, the Director for the Centre for Defence and Security Studies at Massey University. Thank you very much for joining us on the panel today. And our own SIS is expected to publish the first of what will become an annual unclassified report on security threats in July. There's a post note there. It's almost time to wrap up, but of course, Lotto Powerball prize has hit $42 million. Have you guys bought a ticket?
I have bought a ticket,
You have bought a ticket? Neville? You haven't bought a ticket?
No, but I'm very exercised about what I do with the $42 million.
Oh, really? And would you give... what would you do, Neville?
Well, first of all, I'd buy a new car because I've never owned one.
An e-car, I would assume.
A car, but that would take up way less than even $1 million.
Yeah.
And $1 million would be a lot of money.
Yeah.
So I was joking to Verity before because she should be on TV3, so I'd go and buy them.
Oh, yeah.
You could get them real cheap. And I'd also set up a retirement fund. An African billionaire's already done this. There's so many corrupt dictators in Africa that he set up a fund. He says, we will give you money if you quit.
Oh, that's amazing.
And of course, he's had no takers apart from Botswana or somewhere like that. They just don't want to give up. So I'd set up a retirement fund and I'd put Winston at the top.
Oh.
Maybe $1 million.
$1 million. Great.
Get him out. Get him out.
Thanks, Neville. Verity, what would you do?
What would I do?
Well, you're an ambassador for the YWCA, so obviously a good portion of it will go there to helping women.
Yes, helping young women, especially young women who need a bit of help in life, and making sure that they kick ass is, in general, something which I want to do with my entire life.
Yeah.
And probably, I reckon when you get that kind of money, you should instantly half it, put one half in one of those banks that you can't get into because they're too secure, and leave it there for the rest of your life and don't touch it. And then half what you've got again, give that half to charity, and then, do whatever you want with the rest of it, I guess. I probably would. I've always personally wanted to have a bathtub that's encrusted with Swarovski crystals. Probably I'd buy that. I have no space for it, and given that I have climate change anxiety, I probably shouldn't have baths anyway, but I still want it. I'll just look at it instead.
Brilliant. That's wonderful. I'm not sure what I'd do, but I don't think I'd tell any of you.
What are you talking about? My bathtub's a great cause. I need donors.
Well, actually, I'd buy everyone an electric bike.
Yes.
E-bikes have really changed my life. We didn't get round to the Cobb & Co, but I have to say that I'm so pleased that Cobb & Co is reopening in Porirua. Those traffic lights, I might just have to go down there at some stage and give it a try. Thank you to my guests, Verity Johnson and Neville Gibson, on the panel today, and hopefully Wallace will be back with you at the same time tomorrow.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei, coronavirus spreads to more than 30 countries, threatens the Olympics and infects economies too. Halfway down Auckland's Dominion Road, the Chinese restaurant trade is halfway down too. And the World Health Organization warns countries just aren't prepared for the potentially deadly virus. Air New Zealand unveils its Sky Nest, but will it actually get off the ground? Thousands of beneficiaries earning more than 100k still get weekly payments from the government. We investigate whether super should be for everyone. New Zealand Golf shoulders responsibility for its Korowai faux pas, and explosive revelations about what's going into your recycling.
RNZ News at 5. Good afternoon. I'm Paul Brennan. The government is readying for an economic slowdown that could last months or turn into a global recession. The Finance Minister says New Zealand is in a good position to weather any economic shock from the coronavirus outbreak. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Sectors such as tourism and forestry have taken an immediate and substantial hit, but the broader economy will soon start bearing the brunt. The Minister, Grant Robertson, says he's working on 3 scenarios, with the most likely the virus spreading more widely and the impact lasting for the rest of the year. A global recession is the worst case scenario. National says the government has squandered large surpluses and should now be looking at ways to stimulate the economy. Mr Robertson rejects that, saying debt is low and the economy is fundamentally sound. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The coronavirus is threatening to derail the Tokyo Olympics and has already disrupted athletes' preparations here for the Games. A senior international official says a decision on the fate of the event will need to be made in the next 3 months or so. Ashley Abbott from New Zealand's Olympic Committee says they're closely monitoring the situation.
Things are moving really fast, and our job at the moment is working with athletes on the crucial qualification period that takes place now. We're seeing actually athletes having to have their competitions moved or postponed because of the virus, and so, that's an immediate area of focus for us.
Auckland Arts Festival has cancelled a French show due to the outbreak. The chief executive, David Innes, says the aerial spectacle Place des Anges was hampered by rising air freight costs driven by the virus's global impact. He says COVID-19 has had other financial impacts on the festival too, including paying more for performers' airfares because of cancellations in other cities. However, Mr Innes says he doesn't expect any of the other festival shows will be cancelled. The Immigration Minister has ordered officials to take over more decision-making in the wake of the botched handling of Czech drug runner Karel Schrubeck's deportation appeal. Ian Lees-Galloway has implemented recommendations about cases being resolved by delegated decision-makers instead of him. An immigration advisor, Tony Alexander, says that takes away an independent check on immigration decisions.
It's my concern that people's rights are eroded when you send them back to the very department that declined them.
Tony Alexander says that, we've heard that. Tony Alexander says ministers provide a fresh perspective on cases that fall outside normal guidelines. The Prime Minister has announced $2 million towards the relocation of Fijian communities displaced by climate change. Jacinda Ardern made the announcement at the University of the South Pacific in Fiji. 5 communities have already relocated and a further 42 have applied for government support to move. It's hoped the funding will prompt other countries to contribute. New Zealand is the first to do so after a request from Fiji's Prime Minister Franklin Bainimarama. Ms Ardern says Fiji is on the front line of the battle against climate change, yet it contributes the least to rising sea levels and extreme weather. The winner of the New Zealand Golf Open in Queenstown this week will for the first time receive a greenstone pendant carved by local iwi Ngai Tahu. NZ Golf has been working closely with the New Zealand Māori Golf Association to ensure it upholds tikanga Māori. The organisation came in for criticism last year when it gave the winner a fake korowai. The association's patron, Waihoroi Shortland, says the gifting of taonga will become a new tradition.
We're instigating a taonga that will be given to the New Zealand Open champ, kind of like the Augusta thing where you get a green jacket, but here you're going to get a green stone, albeit I think greenstone might be a little bit more precious than a green jacket.
New Zealand Māori Golf Association patron Waihoroi Shortland. It's 4 minutes past 5. On to sport now. New Zealand football is optimistic about its chances of jointly hosting the 2023 Women's World Cup after an inspection tour by the sport's governing body FIFA. New Zealand and Australia have lodged a joint bid to host the tournament, and a FIFA team spent 3 days in both countries recently to assess potential host cities, stadiums and training facilities. There are 4 contenders vying to host the tournament, and New Zealand Football Chief Executive Andrew Pragnell says the inspection team seemed impressed.
There's a lot of strength in terms of the culture and society of both of our countries and the progressive steps we've taken around both football in terms of pay parity, female leadership generally and moving towards gender equality. I think ultimately people on both sides of the Tasman are easy to engage with. Both countries are well geared up for tourists and there's nothing new that needs to be built.
Andrew Pragnell. FIFA will vote on who'll host the 2023 World Cup in June. The New Zealand boxing team is being caught out by the coronavirus outbreak again, and there's concern they may not get to next week's Olympic qualifying tournament. A month after the Asia-Oceania Olympic qualifying tournament in China was postponed, the team is again in danger of missing the rescheduled event in Jordan next week. The New Zealanders are training at the Italian National Boxing Centre, and coach Billy Meehan says he's concerned Jordan could close its borders to those coming from Italy, which could spell the end of their bid to get to the Tokyo Games. That's the news.
I'm Catherine Ryan. Tomorrow on 9 to noon, the United States firm with the world's first human composting service. Chike Frankie Endorsian on giving a voice to gay Nigeria. Psychologist Sar Johal talks about parental burnout, like workplace burnout, but without the employee assistance program. And James Crute with what he's been viewing. Join me on 9 to noon tomorrow on RNZ National.
Now we've got a short forecast for Med Service to midnight tomorrow Thursday. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, Waikato, Waitomo and Taumarunui. Fine but isolated showers tomorrow, mainly inland during the afternoon. For Gisborne, cloudy periods, a few showers. Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taihape, Manawatu, Hawke's Bay and Tararua District. Generally fine, isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. Taranaki, Whanganui, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington. The remainder of Wairarapa, also Bulla, Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha. Areas of morning and evening cloud, otherwise fine. Westland and Fiordland, cloud increasing, patchy drizzle in Fiordland spreading north overnight, turning to rain tomorrow. Heavy falls south of Otira possible. Clutha and Southland, fine spells, but isolated showers possible this afternoon. Scattered rain developing tomorrow, briefly heavy in the afternoon. At the Chatham Islands, partly cloudy with a few showers tomorrow morning. Nearly 5:07.
Thanks, Paul, and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The number of New Zealand retirees getting their super while earning more than $100,000 has topped 30,000, costing taxpayers more than $500 million each year. Figures released to Checkpoint show that number has nearly tripled over the past 10 years and doesn't even include incomes through KiwiSaver or other portfolio investments. Some economists say the numbers support their calls for income testing pension payments, but others say that risks throwing the baby out with the bathwater, and it's vital super remains universal. Nita Blake-Person reports.
The median New Zealand wage is nearly $53,000, and the number of Kiwis who are earning double that in their retirement, $100,000 or more, is more than 31,000. That's roughly the population of Blenheim. The latest inland revenue figures from the 2017-18 financial year show that number has been rising steadily. It's nearly tripled since 2009. Susan St John is the director of the Retirement Policy and Research Centre and says it still doesn't paint the full picture of what retirees are earning.
The figures are actually an underestimate of the kind of incomes that many at the top end will be enjoying, because it doesn't count pie income, and it also, of course, doesn't count the capital gains that many in those brackets will have enjoyed. So it's an underestimate of what's going on in terms of where those super payments are going.
Superannuation payments are universal in New Zealand, and superannuitants make up the largest group of beneficiaries in the country. There's been much debate in recent years over whether to increase the current retirement age of 65 to reflect the fact people are working longer, but last month the Interim Retirement Commissioner poured cold water on the idea, saying the current cost was sustainable for the next 30 years. But Susan St John says hard decisions need to be made.
I think that increasingly the younger generation is looking sideways at the older population and seeing that they have had all kinds of advantages that are not enjoyed by younger people.
Economist Shamabeel Yaqub says the figures aren't surprising, as a lot of people are continuing to work later in life and many have accumulated large amounts of wealth. But he says if super wasn't paid to people earning more than $100K, that would save taxpayers about $608 million.
One day we're going to wake up and realise we're spending significant sums of our taxes on looking after folk. Quite often, some of those people will be pretty well off and don't need the support. And in those instances, I think that's when we're going to have that necessary conversation about who gets to have access to New Zealand super, at what level, and is universality something we can continue at the same time as wanting to do everything else like dealing with child poverty, education, health, and so on.
He wants super to be means tested, related to wealth and income.
The reality is that we don't want to penalise people for, say, working into old age, and neither do we want to penalise people for accumulating wealth. But we have to be consistent in our understanding that actually when we look out for the next 20, 30 years, our system of taxation and our systems of supporting old age and superannuitants is probably not sustainable.
Susan St John has different ideas. She says New Zealand super has enormous benefits, including being simple, comprehensive and helping to reduce the degree of hardship amongst older people.
However, the problem is that we are not taxing people on high incomes enough. And so one of the ways of dealing with this would be to redesign a tax for superannuitants for their other income that would effectively claw back the advantage to getting superannuation from them, but it would only really affect the top income brackets who probably wouldn't even notice.
Last year, New Zealand super cost $14.5 billion, and that's increasing by more than $1 billion each year. By 2024, it's predicted to cost the country nearly $20 billion a year. Pension researcher Michael Littlewood says while he supports having a wider discussion about super, current rates are sustainable. And while most people would agree that we shouldn't pay pensions to those who don't need them, he says things are a bit more complicated than that.
The trouble you get into, though, is where do you draw the line? At what point do you say that is the taxpayer's obligation to you finishes, or at least starts to finish, and where does it end altogether? And once you start putting a line in that particular income sand, you start having to make all sorts of judgments about what it should count and what shouldn't count.
The Inland Revenue figures show 2,500 people are still getting super payments while on incomes of more than $300,000. Mr Littlewood says people won't give up that universal payment lightly.
What do you think would happen if you put that line in the sand at 300k? Do you think that people would be entirely unresponsive to that? No, of course they wouldn't. They'd shift their incomes around so that their income was less than 300.
For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
New Zealand is readying for a major economic shock as the world reacts with increasing alarm to the coronavirus outbreak, which has now claimed 2,700 lives worldwide. Although there are signs it may have peaked in China, the disease has now spread to more than 30 countries, and emergency efforts are being stepped up in South Korea, Italy and Iran. At a hotel in Tenerife, more than 1,000 guests and workers are in quarantine after an Italian doctor and his wife tested positive for coronavirus. In Iran, there's been 16 deaths, with the country's deputy health minister himself testing positive for coronavirus. In Italy, the death toll has risen to 11, with a 45% increase in the number of infections in just the past 24 hours. There are now 322 reported cases there, and there are also now cases in Austria and Switzerland. World stock markets have fallen further amid investor concerns, including New Zealand's top 50 index, which opened this morning down almost 2%. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
Sectors like tourism and forestry have taken an immediate and substantial hit as a result of the ban on foreign travellers arriving from China. But the broader economy will soon start bearing the brunt. Tourism New Zealand Chief Executive Stephen England Hall says he expects the visitor market will bounce back. It's just unclear when. But he says the recovery period alone will take months.
Previously has been estimated around $500 million or more. So it's pretty significant. You know, one of the things we're very mindful of is this situation is constantly changing and constantly shifting. And so while we're able to approximate the impact from a China perspective, we haven't yet been able to approximate the impact from a broader world perspective.
Stephen Guerin is the Chief Executive of PGG Wrightson. He says the sector is cautious, but international prices do remain high.
The world could change relatively quickly also. The key question is we don't actually know. The supply chain will be tight in terms of meat volumes up into China in particular. You know, the market will have been emptied out. So if things did turn, don't know that, but if things did turn, you know, there could be strong demand. That's the uncertainty. We just don't know.
Nationals finance spokesperson Paul Goldsmith says everyone is hoping the outbreak will be contained soon and the economic impact limited.
Nobody knows the answer to that. And that's why good economic management runs surpluses so that we can respond effectively when these sorts of incidents occur.
He says New Zealand is not well enough prepared to respond to a major shock.
We've had slow growth last year and projected deficits already before the coronavirus. And so our strong message is that the government needs to lift its game substantially on economic management.
The Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, rejects that, saying the economy is fundamentally in good shape.
We actually have a lower net debt than what we inherited from the previous government. We've run 2 very solid years of surplus. We've got further surpluses forecast. The fundamentals of the New Zealand economy are strong. And actually we ended the first 6 months of the financial year at the end of December in a strong position.
Mr Robertson says there may be a point in the future where the government needs to further stimulate the economy, and work is currently being done to prepare for some of those options. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
As coronavirus continues to spread offshore, local ethnic businesses say they're starting to fail as customers stay away. Profits have halved for some Chinese restaurants in Auckland. With the increase of the minimum wage set to kick in, the timing couldn't be worse. Our reporter Alex Perrottet and cameraman Nick Munro took a stroll along Dominion Road to see who, if anyone, was ducking out for lunch.
Unsurprisingly, there's no one at the Wuhan Cafe, and in broken English, we're told business is tanking. Despite it being lunch hour, there's no luck here. Around the corner at the Golden Garden, there's a few customers, but manager Tony Situ says many are staying away.
Been a little bit affected, because what happened in China, people are scared to come out to eat. They feel not a bit safe.
Steve Ming at Jimmy sells fried chicken and bubble tea, but even that combination isn't enticing the usual crowds.
Not too much customer come to buy our stuff, and we lose lots of customers, And before we can sell, I think we lose around 30%.
He says he's had to lay people off.
Before I have enough money to pay my labor, I can get some employees. Before we have 3, 1 in kitchen, 2 at front, but now me at front, 1 in kitchen, only me and him.
Turning to Uber Eats, and the Chinese version GoGo has bagged him 20 extra orders a day. But even here at Okashi House Sweet Store, it's empty, and we're told trade is halved. Last week's Restaurant Association member survey had 42.5% of them reporting a downturn in customers compared to this time last year, and just over 40% of those members believe it's due to a fear of coronavirus. And it's not just food outlets suffering, but also health stores who sell about half their products to customers in China. Sissy Cheng at Greens Health says business is down because many back home can't afford the freight.
I think because of the transfer cost is higher, so some customers do not want to pay for this.
Kenny Dong at New Way Health Products says it's the reduction in flights that's driven up those costs.
The freight cost almost doubled, from $400 per kilo to $9, more than double actually. You have to choose the high cost one, otherwise the parcel will be delayed.
Difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, difficult time. But we are lucky actually, because at least we are safe. But people in China, they are suffering a lot.
Many of the places we've visited up and down Dominion Road in the Balmoral area here in Auckland say that they've seen a downturn in business, particularly over the last fortnight, and it's those restaurants catering for the Chinese New Zealander, the international tourist, for example, that have seen up to 60% loss in clientele. This place, Harport, we're told, opened late last year, and we're told today that it's already closed down. Here at Shanghai Restaurant, it's very quiet, and due to the language barrier, a kind customer jumped in to explain why it's so bad.
About 60% before.
And they say that many of those crucial customers from China who have arrived home are still in self-imposed quarantine.
So many Chinese people back to New Zealand, but also stay at home. They're cooking at home.
They're not dining out?
Yeah, they're not standing out now.
Kimberly Miller runs a sushi restaurant in the city on Queen Street. She knows how desperate these people are, so she's arrived for lunch with her husband and baby.
We are opening sushi shop, so in people's mind it's an Asian restaurant, and they will worry about the virus, even it's not, we are not from China, but they are still worried about it.
Kimberly says she's just returned from China herself, where she had to be in quarantine for a fortnight and then self-imposed quarantine back here. She praises both governments for their efforts, but says there should be more support, especially as they stare down the looming increase in overheads.
So for us, it's quite big thing because we are small business, small to medium size. So we have to let our employee go, and we have to work longer hour, we have to work harder and make the small business going. So sometimes I bring my baby to the shop because there's no staff, I have to work myself.
She also says there are other ways to help, such as tax breaks or rent assistance. She says some Chinese landlords have already lowered the rent for their tenants to prevent them from going out of business altogether. These small businesses say it's an uphill struggle, and if things don't change in the next month, they too could be shutting up shop. On Dominion Road for Checkpoint, Alex Perrottet.
And after 6 tonight, reporter Matthew Tunison looks at what threat the coronavirus outbreak poses to this year's Olympics in Tokyo. It is 21 minutes after 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback on anything you've heard on the program so far this evening. Let us know. Are you still going out to ethnic food restaurants? Are you still dining on Dominion Road in Auckland in particular? And if not, why not? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. If you have ever flown long haul in cattle class, you will know only too well the pain and frustration of not being able to lie down, legs practically wrapped around your neck about to go spare. Well, today Air New Zealand moved to patent a new economy class sleep pod that's been 3 years in the making. It's called Skynest, but will it fly? So far it's only been trialled on the ground with hundreds of sleep testers sworn to secrecy, and a decision on rolling it out won't be made until next year. In a moment we talk to Kerry Reeves from Air New Zealand, but first, as a concept, picture this: a cluster of 6 bunks, 2 rows of 3 each, with bedding, snooze-friendly lighting and a privacy curtain. Location on the plane yet to be decided, but the vital info is the size. Skynest is about 200 centimetres long and 58 centimetres wide. So, in a totally unscientific experiment, the Checkpoint team decided to create an office version of the Skynest. Okay, let's put this Skynest concept to the test. Let's make one ourselves. Got this bit of, well, newsprint paper, and Matthew's going to help me. It's about 2 metres long, so let's measure it out lengthwise. So 2 metres there, round about. This is just a rough guide. And we're told it's about 58 centimetres wide, so Matt's going to roll the tape measure out again. Where are we at? 58 there. Let's just put a mark there and let's measure down the end here, Matt, and then we'll just fold up that bit. Is that it? Okay, 58. Let's fold it over along those lines. Thanks, Matthew. And let's just check it. I'll flip it over. So that's about 2 metres long, our Skynest. Let's just stick it across the middle to make sure we've got it about right. Yep. 60 centimetres across, giving them a little bit of leeway. So let's check it out. Couch. Got to have a pillow. Let's make sure it's right at the end. So that's it. Oh, I'm practically wearing my pyjamas today. And I'm about 180 centimetres long. And my colleagues measured my shoulder width, 40 centimetres. So I fit in here okay. On my side, maybe. On my back, minus the mic pack is a little bit uncomfortable. It's okay, it's a bit of a tight squeeze. Simon, do you want to help me out? I want to see what you look like lying down here. Can you fit all right? So, Simon, cameraman extraordinaire. Let's make sure, yep. Yeah, that is a completely different prospect. And Simon's got a little bit of overhang with his feet as well. So for me, maybe it's a sky nest, but for Simon, ant nest, maybe? So Simon there's a bit taller than me, and as we showed there, if you want to look back on the video, his legs hang over a little bit on the sky nest. So it raises so many questions. Can you sit up without sconning your head? Well, here's Air New Zealand's Kerry Reeves.
No, we don't intend for people to sit up, otherwise they would stay in their seat. But it is something that you can lean and prop yourself up on a pillow to read a book or watch something on your device if you want to, rather than going to sleep.
So what's the intention here? Do you have a seat as well as the Sky Nest? How does it work?
Yes, clearly the Sky Nest is not a certified for occupancy for takeoff and landing, so it doesn't meet all the crash test requirements for that. So we have to have all our passengers seated in a certified seat for takeoff and landing. So the users of the Sky Nest will have a seat in the main cabin as well.
And for turbulence, do you have to get out of the nest?
No. For turbulence, then you are okay to stay in the Sky Nest as long as you have your seatbelt fastened.
So do you imagine, is it possible, do you expect one person to use the Sky Nest, or if you're travelling with a family, can you purchase a Sky Nest and then rotate people through it for a few hours of sleep?
We think that the economics for this to be a viable economy product, because if you want to sleep for the whole flight, then business class is really the only way to do that. To make it economic for an economy passenger, then you want to optimise the time that you have to do that. And so, scientific research would say that during our flight times, then if you can get, sort of 3 to 4 hours of good quality sleep, similar to what our crew do during their rest periods on long-haul flights, then that's sufficient to make you feel rested and relaxed when you get off. So timeframes such as that is probably more the economic situations to where we would go with perhaps sharing the use of it or people buying sessions.
So it could be like one of those capsule hotels when you're in transit. You book it for 4 hours or you book it for 3 hours.
Yeah, similar to that, I think, is probably the most viable way for us to make this work.
So do you envisage that people will pay by the hour for the use of the Nest?
We would have to have some structure around that. We couldn't have and wouldn't want people to come and go as they pleased. Obviously, if they need to go to the bathroom, well, that's accepted. But we want to have it staged in particular shifts, if you want to call it that, where those sessions have a beginning and an end, and the passengers are introduced to it and then exit to it after that session is finished. And then another one would start after the Sky Nest has been refreshed.
So what kind of price point are you looking at here?
Well, that's the question that we don't really know the answer to yet. We've done a lot of customer testing with many economy passengers, or typical economy passengers, and we've got quite variable feedback from that. The average of the numbers are sort of in the ballpark to say it could be viable, but we're really keen to see the feedback from the media release and just get a judge of what people see as the value. And clearly, it will have a limited opportunity because there is only 6 is what we're proposing, initially. And so if that was 2 or 3 sessions, then you're still talking less than 10% of the economy passengers that would be able to take advantage of this as well.
So I just had a quick look on your website, and it's about $2,400 one way to LA premium economy, about $1,300 one way economy. Where would you put this on that spectrum? Is it around the same price as premium economy? Is it between premium economy and business, or where does it sit in that? If you can't give me an exact price.
Our research would say that if you had to pay as much as premium economy to have this, then we probably wouldn't get the uptake. and those people would go and sit in premium economy because they get the extra service and the space and so on. So that price point's probably too high. So somewhere between clearly is where we think it would land and be viable to get the volume of passengers to make this work.
Is there any service in the nest?
No. It's purely if you're an economy passenger, then nothing else changes. We allow you to take water bottles and your devices and things like that in there, or book, but no food. Clearly, that's something that our passengers would say they wouldn't want people to take food in there. So during the period of the session, if that's what we end up doing, then it would just simply be the occupancy that you are purchasing.
So how have you trialled this? Have you actually put it on a plane and seen how it works on a long-haul flight?
No. That's a massive step forward because of the regulations and the certification requirements, and so it's very complex, significantly more complex than we first envisaged, and that's probably one of the main reasons why no one's done this before. But we think we've solved those complexities, but it is going to be challenging and quite costly for us to put it on the plane. So we want to be sure about doing the trials and making sure we understand where we're going to go with the outcome before we do that. Having said that, we are not afraid to be bold and take some risks in these ventures as well, as you well know.
So is the nest approximately the same size as the rest area the crew get when they go for a sleep? Are the beds around the same size?
Yes, the dimensions of them are pretty much the same as the crew rest area, and to that matter, the same as our business class seats when they're in bed mode as well. So that's physically the length and the width is what someone needs to be able to rest adequately and sleep.
Because I did a really rough test, Kerry, where I mapped out the size of this thing on the floor in our newsroom and had a bit of a lie down. And I'm reasonably tall, but not very broad. And I'm wondering, people are getting bigger, and a bloke would be quite a bit bigger than me. Who are you aiming for here?
Well, we're aiming for the economy passenger that is fearful of, on longer flights, and, we're talking about up to 17 hours to New York and so on. We're aiming for the passenger who's very fearful of that, but doesn't have the affordability to provide themselves with more space or luxury on board the aircraft. And so there's a large number of people in the population that fit into that bracket.
But will they fit into the nest, I suppose, is the question.
Oh, yeah. Yes. I mean, the bed length is around 80 inches. That is about the same as our business class seats, and our business class seats are one of the largest beds in the market.
Okay. So how long will people have to wait to see this on a flight?
Well, for us, we have reached a point where we've been through the desirability of what this might mean to passengers. We've worked through with the regulators and a limited amount of engineering to give us confidence that we could overcome all the feasibility stages, and that's where we're at now. And so we are now working heavily through the viability on how we would make this pay and give the value to the customers. So that's still going to take us some time before we're confident to make a decision. But we're certainly working towards wanting to do this. We think it's the right thing to do for the future of travel. We want to be at the forefront of that.
Would it have been easier just to give everyone an extra few centimetres on their normal seats?
You could say that, but many customers would say that's not what I want. That still doesn't help me. And so I still can't lie down, I can't stretch out, and I can't rest. And so that doesn't really solve the overall problem by giving someone a few more centimetres.
And that's Kerry Reeves from Air New Zealand. And coming Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, the government reviews the future of coal and wood burners. New Zealand Golf moves swiftly on from last year's Korowai faux pas, and the slack rubbish habit sparking dangerous fires in our recycling trucks. Do get in touch about anything you've heard on the programme. I really want to hear from you on that concept Sky Nest. Is it a good idea? How much would you be prepared to pay? They're talking about basically renting it out to you on an hourly basis during a flight. How much is reasonable per hour for the pleasure of having a snooze in flight? Text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now with Paul.
Thanks, Lisa. The local share market has had a third consecutive day of steep losses. The benchmark top 50 index has closed off its lows after recouping some early losses, but still ended down 185 points or 1.6%. Investors have been selling risky assets such as shares because of uncertainty over the impact of the coronavirus on companies and the world economy. Auckland Arts Festival has cancelled a French show due to the coronavirus outbreak. The chief executive, David Innes, says the aerial spectacular Place des Anges was hampered by rising air freight costs driven by the virus's global impact. He says the coronavirus has had other financial impacts on the festival too. A Waikato dairy farmer who broke the tails of more than 100 cows has been given home detention and barred from owning animals for 3 years. Glenn Raymond Steiner was sentenced today after earlier pleading guilty to the ill treatment of animals. The Ministry for Primary Industries says an inspection of his herd showed more than 150 of the cows' tails were broken in multiple places. The Prime Minister says New Zealanders understand the need to contribute to lifting Fijians out of poverty, even when some in New Zealand are living in cars. Jacinda Ardern today visited a settlement in Suva, where Australian and New Zealand funding is helping improve sanitation and water supply. The mayor for Arrowtown, which at times has some of the worst air pollution in Australasia, is supporting a proposal to phase out high-emitting coal and wood burners. Under proposed changes in a Ministry for the Environment discussion document, households could keep using existing solid fuel burners until they reach the end of their life. And a critically injured 4-year-old who was hurt in his Flaxmere home exactly 1 month ago remains in a stable condition at Starship Hospital. No one has been charged or arrested since the boy was found with extensive injuries. And those are the headlines.
Thanks, Paul. Let's get to business news now, and I think Emma Hatton is joining us from our Wellington studio today. Emma, so I see here that Meridian has its earnings results out today, and it's looking pretty healthy. What's going on there?
Yeah, Lisa, so another day of a lot of company earnings coming out. Meridian we'll look at this evening. It had a record first half profit. It rose 26% to $191 million. Revenue was also up 5% to a whopping $1.78 billion. New Zealand had really good hydro generation in that 6 months to December, also strong wind generation and robust customer sales. And it really was that New Zealand division of Meridian which helped with that good profit that it saw. Australia wasn't so good. That's where they operate the Power Shop brand. Despite really good customer sales there, the drought and the accessibility, the availability of the wind farms reduced generation. Looking ahead for the company, it's looking good for them. They go into the year with a strong reputation, which according to consumer surveys, which they noted, which given the amount of competition in the sector here is worth its weight. It does acknowledge it faces a number of challenges as well, as does other operators in the sector. Things like gas supply uncertainty, high wholesale power prices, and upcoming RMA reforms. Specifically to Meridian, of course, is the uncertainty over the smelter and what it might do. So its viability is under review at the moment. It's reviewing itself. It is Meridian's biggest customer, but it has said that the high power prices and transmission costs are a problem for it. So currently the smelter works under an agreement where they can exit New Zealand with 12 months notice. Meridian has said that they've offered them a deal which they are considering at the moment. Basically, if that notice period was a bit longer, they might be able to offer them a bit of a better deal. So that's something Rio Tinto, the smelter's owners, is considering, and we should be able to know more about that near the end of next month.
Okay, well, moving away from earnings, the government is considering a law change. Now, this is to make sure that small businesses are paid on time. So this is a bit of a big deal for small businesses, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is a discussion document that's come out today from MB, and the Minister for Small Business, Stuart Nash, is just basically wanting to gauge the industry's thoughts on it. Does it need to be legislated, or is it something that they can manage themselves? So the issue is where small businesses have contracts with big businesses. They might supply them a small, niche product or something that the big business uses as a cog in their wider operations. However, there's a power imbalance. So the big business can essentially, and what some of them are doing, are imposing extended payment terms. So what that means is they'll get their product, but they may not pay the small business for up to 90 days. In the meantime, the big business is demanding payment from their customers very quickly, so within 7 days. As you can see there, they're essentially using the small business as a free line of credit. So that's inherently unfair. And the problem is the small businesses, because they rely on these contracts, they don't feel like they can negotiate. They may risk losing the contract if they become difficult. So that's something that the Minister is engaging on at the moment and asking for feedback as to whether that's something that needs to become law.
OK, well, coronavirus has, turned a lot of attention onto the market. So how did we finish up today?
Yeah, so as you heard in the headlines there, the NZX Top 50 Index closed down for the third day in a row. It ended down 185 points or 1.6% to 11,533. It's ended up where it was about 2 weeks ago. Remembering last week, it actually hit record highs, so it's coming down. We're not alone, of course. Wall Street fell 3% and Australia is currently down 2.5%, and the main Asian markets are down less than 1%. The New Zealand dollar trading at 63.1 US cents, 95.7 Australian and 48.6 British pence.
Thanks, Emma. That's our business reporter, Emma Hatton, joining us from our delightful Wellington studio there with today's business. The government wants to see if people will warm to the idea of doing away with their high-emitting coal and wood burners. They're also looking at tougher air quality standards by monitoring smaller particles hazardous to health. The proposals are part of a discussion document released by the Ministry for the Environment today. Our political reporter, Charlie Deriva, has the details.
The picturesque Otago town of Arrowtown embodies the image of clean, green New Zealand. But beyond first glance, the town is dealing with some of the worst air quality in Australasia. Queenstown Lakes District Council Mayor Jim Bolt says it's been a problem for some time.
It's just the fact that in wintertime we get very still air, cold frosty mornings, everybody lights the fire, no wind, and Arrowtown sits in a perfect little basin. Beautiful place, but it's in that perfect little basin without any air movement.
But as NIWA's principal air quality scientist, Ian Longley explains, they are not an anomaly.
A lot of our towns that have the worst air quality problems, they're not our largest towns. It's not Auckland and Wellington. It is small villages to some degree, like Arrowtown, like Alexandra, like Milton, most of which are kind of in the South Island or in inland North Island. And what they all have in common is, widespread use of wood burners or in some cases coal for home heating in the winter.
Under proposed changes, Associate Environment Minister Nanaia Mahuta says households already using solid fuel burners for heating could keep using them until they reach the end of life. But afterwards, they may then need to replace it with a more efficient alternative.
What it will mean is that eventually there'll be a phasing out of coal burners and there'll be an opportunity to have a more compliant, more efficient wood or pellet burner.
Nanaia Mahuta says the document's proposed changes would save an estimated $820 million in healthcare costs over the next decade. Jim Bolt supports the move, but wants to make sure households won't be too out of pocket.
By the time you pay for a new appliance, a new flue, the installation, etc., possibly changes to your roof as a result of a different flue, it's quite an expensive business. And for people who are already under some hardship financially, this is not something that comes easy.
And the government says they do have some initiatives in place to give extra support to those making the switch. The document also proposed introducing both an annual and a daily standard for PM2.5, or finer particle matter, into the current outdoor air quality standards framework, instead of the larger PM10 particles. Ian Longley says the larger particles are predominantly from natural sources people can't control. For example, sea salt makes up half of those particles in Auckland's air.
But the 2.5 particles, those are the ones we can control. Those are the ones that come from vehicles, from home heating, from industry. So not only are we focusing on the particles that have the biggest impact on health, we're also focusing on the particles that we can control as well.
Dr. Longley says the standards are in line with Global Health Authority's advice and are long overdue. However, he says this may mean some councils who have improved local air quality could slip back out of compliance. He says the new standards for burners would cause a third less pollution than their predecessors.
Whether that's enough for places like Arrowtown and Alexandra, I think isn't clear yet. We're still involved in some research to address those kind of questions of how much reduction do you actually need to meet these new standards, and we'll be looking at over the next year or two.
Consultation on the document closes in 2 months' time. From Parliament, for Checkpoint, Ko Charlie Drever, DNA.
The Immigration Minister is delegating more of his decision-making to officials in the wake of the botched handling of Czech drug runner Karel Schrubeck's deportation appeal. Ian Lees-Galloway initially granted Schrubeck residence before reversing the decision and ordering his deportation. But there's concern that passing on the decision-making takes away an independent check and an avenue for cases that fall outside normal guidelines. Our immigration reporter Jill Bonnet has more.
A report on residents' deportation processes after the Karel Schrubeck case recommended more cases be resolved by delegated decision-makers within Immigration New Zealand. It said the minister should remain above the fray, intervening only as a last resort. Mr Lees-Galloway said he accepted the report's recommendations and has implemented them. An immigration lawyer, Mark Williams, says that's the latest in a long line of changes to decision-making over the years.
I can recall when Leanne Dalziel was the Minister of Immigration, she would personally write quite detailed letters. She would compliment some lawyers about the submissions they've made, and she would literally have thousands of these things that she actually go through personally herself.
He says that wasn't sustainable as visa numbers climbed and experienced staff are better qualified to handle complex decisions. But he says officials may err on the side of caution, leading to fewer favourable decisions for visa applicants and those facing deportation.
The delegated decision-maker may well be far more conservative with a concern of potential employment issues if they ultimately make a wrong decision.
An immigration advisor, Tony Alexander, says handing decisions to immigration staff takes away an independent perspective on crucial decisions about who stays and who goes.
It's my concern that people's rights are eroded when you send them back to the very department that declined them.
She says it's unfortunate that the decision in the Karel Schrubeck case means others aren't allowed the same access to ministerial decisions. Schrubeck is still serving a 6-year prison term and is awaiting a tribunal hearing to appeal his deportation. The Immigration Minister will retain responsibility for some decisions, such as people threatening security and the immigration status of protected persons who may have committed crimes. The Associate Minister of Immigration will continue to decide requests for ministerial intervention in individual cases presented by members of Parliament. For Checkpoint, Jill Bonnet.
It is 12 minutes to 6. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keep sending us your feedback. A number of you getting in touch about, the Sky Nest, so we'll hopefully get to some of that feedback a bit later. But let us know also whether you think we should do away with high-emitting coal and wood burners. Is it time to get rid of the home fire? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or flick us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The Prime Minister has seen real poverty in Fiji, but says despite some New Zealanders also living in hardship, doing nothing to help the Pacific isn't an option. Jacinda Ardern visited a settlement in Suva today where Australian and New Zealand funding is helping improve sanitation and water supply to local communities. Ms Ardern says Fiji has a different measure of poverty and New Zealanders appreciate that a small amount of money can make a big difference in the Pacific. Our political reporter Joe Moyer is travelling with the Prime Minister and joins us now from Suva. Kia ora, Joe. Tell us about this community that Jacinda Ardern visited today.
Yeah, hi Lisa. So we travelled today to this small village on the outskirts of Suva. There's people that have been living there for generations actually. We spoke to some local people there, spent their whole lives there, had brought their own children, grandchildren up there. Now they talked about when they grew up as children, there barely being toilets, no sanitation at all really, no decent drinking water. They talked about things like footpaths being a luxury, and saying that RISE, which is the name of this project, that's been run by Australia but New Zealand is contributing money to it. It's designed to sort out those sanitation issues, sort out those drinking water issues, and the plan by RISE is actually to eventually try and roll this out across other parts of Asia. Now, we spoke to Jacinda Ardern at a press conference following that event just a short time ago, and she talked about the fact that, this is real poverty that you do see in Fiji and where we were in this village, and described it as being sort of a different measure to what you see in New Zealand. She accepts that more needs to be done in New Zealand. However, she says, Kiwis do appreciate that we can provide a small amount, basically, and that can do a hell of a lot for thousands of people in the Pacific. Interesting timing around this, given we had the child poverty stats come out yesterday, which obviously showed very little change in material hardship in New Zealand. Those figures compared to last year showed that material hardship remains at about 1 in 8 children in New Zealand. So, the Prime Minister has got lots of problems to deal with at home, but she says that, doing nothing for the Pacific, she doesn't accept that Kiwis would accept that.
Also today, women in leadership has been a talking point. What was that about?
That's right. So Jacinda Ardern met with women MPs, some youth leaders and business and civil society women as well at this lunch today at the New Zealand residence in Suva. Now, she sort of made a bit of a speech at the start. She talked about her own experience growing up as a woman in New Zealand and having dreams and aspirations, and talked about the fact that New Zealand's obviously had a number of female prime ministers, governors general, chief justices as well, but said, that doesn't mean that we don't have our own issues when it comes to gender equality. She had a Q&A which we weren't part of with these women afterwards, and spoke to them a little bit more personally. The feedback she gave us at the press conference was that they said that they felt that they had more of a voice now in Fiji than they have had in years gone by, but that there's still more work to be done. Fiji's obviously better in terms of representation in Parliament with women than anywhere else in the Pacific. They have the highest at 20%, but obviously that's still quite low in comparison to other countries.
Okay, so it is an overseas trip. Any announcements today then?
Yes, no, always an announcement. So we're currently at the University of the South Pacific. Now there's a lot of students here. They're out the doors trying to listen to Jacinda Ardern. And here she has just announced $2 million for a Fiji fund. Now this has been set up to develop a program for relocating displaced communities. This is people that have been affected by climate change. So Frank Bainimarama came up with this concept. He spoke to Jacinda Ardern at the Pacific Islands Forum in Tuvalu last year and asked her personally to commit to it from New Zealand. She's agreed to do that, which makes us actually the first country to give money to this fund. So that's $2 million. She's hoping that means that other countries, Australia, other nearby countries will also have the confidence, I guess, to contribute money towards that as well.
Okay, so where are you all off to next for the rest of the trip?
Well, we're all just about to bowl into a van and head for the airport, and we're off to Nadi tonight. Now, tomorrow morning, the Prime Minister is going to be making a visit to a mosque just outside of Nadi. Now, this is the mosque where 3 Fijians who died in the March 15th mosque attack in Christchurch are from. Now, they were visiting Christchurch at the time and got caught up in that horrific terror attack. Jacinda Ardern actually met one of the wives of one of these men in Christchurch the day after the attack when she was down there. She spoke to us in the press conference and actually got quite emotional talking about it. She said she vividly remembers speaking to this woman who said she didn't know where her husband was, she didn't know if he was alive, and she couldn't find him. So she will be meeting with the families tomorrow, and there was an article actually in a local newspaper speaking to those families, and they said for them it feels like this will be closure. Following that visit tomorrow, we'll be jumping onto the Defence Force plane and making our way to Sydney for that bilateral with Scott Morrison, the annual Trans-Tasman talk in Sydney on Friday.
Thanks, Jo. That's our political reporter, Jo Moyer, who is travelling with the Prime Minister in Fiji at the moment, and then they are heading on to Australia. Following a major blunder last year in which New Zealand Golf bestowed the winner of the New Zealand Open with a fake korowai, it appears the organisation has learnt its lesson. A pōwhiri with participation from local iwi Ngāi Tahu opened the tournament today, and this year's winner will receive, you guessed it, a real korowai. Te Anua Huri Hanganui reports.
Renowned weaver Vera Noah Hettit took NZ Golf to task last year, saying the fake korowai it used was insulting and a form of tokenism. NZ Golf has since worked hard alongside the New Zealand Māori Golf Association to ensure it doesn't happen again. The association's Māori golf patron, Waihoroi Shortland, says the gifting of a greenstone pendant carved by Ngaitahu's Fane Robinson will become a new tradition for the tournament.
The one thing that we insisted upon, that we're down here to create a tradition, and we want it to be ongoing. We're instigating a taonga that will be given to the New Zealand Open champ, kind of like the Augusta thing where you get a green jacket, but here you're going to get a green stone, albeit I think green stone might be a little bit more precious than a green jacket.
A real korowai will also be draped over this year's New Zealand Open winner. NZ Golf chair Michael Smith admits they got it wrong last year, but a stronger partnership with Māori was evident in the opening pōwhiri today.
The poster was very moving. It was a welcome from the mana whenua. This was an ideal opportunity to just acknowledge the partnership.
Mr Shortland acknowledges incorporating tikanga Māori can feel daunting for some, but he says reaching out for advice is the first step.
You can't do it any other way. I mean, there's usually a period of standoffishness between people who want to do it and wonder how to do it. But once they start to engage, do a little bit of soul searching and people searching, you usually will find people who can help you work it out.
The New Zealand Māori golf champion, Owen Lloyd, will have the role of handing over the korowai to this year's New Zealand Open winner, and the New Zealand Māori Golf Association's Vice President, Chris Wana, hopes it will be a symbolic gesture.
This is understanding that we have a huge amount of the Māori population playing golf in New Zealand. Maybe underrepresented at New Zealand Golf at that level, but we are working on that. And they see absolute value in being partners with New Zealand Māori Golf, which is why we've gone down this journey in the last 18 months or so.
And to further acknowledge that partnership, the New Zealand Māori champion will gain automatic entry into the New Zealand Golf Open every year. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi, ko te aniwa, hurihanga nui, aho.
New Zealand football is quietly confident after completing the next step in their joint bid with Australia to host the 2023 Women's World Cup. With a final decision around 3 months away, a team from world governing body FIFA spent 3 days in both countries last week assessing potential host cities, stadiums and training facilities. The FIFA team has already assessed the bids of Brazil and Colombia, with the final contender Japan the last stop to make. New Zealand football chief executive Andrew Pragnell told Clay Wilson while the joint bid is up against strong competition, they are cautiously optimistic about their chances.
We definitely put our best foot forward. I think there's some of the strengths of the bid. Obviously, it's the first cross confederation bid. The fact that two different football confederations are working so closely together, and I think it was, from our perspective, fairly seamless. There's a lot of strength in terms of the culture and society of both of our countries and the progressive steps we've taken around both football in terms of pay parity, the steps we've taken in terms of female leadership generally and moving towards gender equality. I think ultimately people on both sides of the Tasman are easy to engage with. Both countries are well geared up for tourists and all the tourist infrastructure is already in place as well as all the stadium infrastructure. There's nothing new that needs to be built.
Sounds like a lot went well, but was there anything that came out of it in terms of areas that perhaps still need to be worked on or developed a bit more?
No, I guess for us now is sort of seeing how the report plays out, actually. So one of the great things about this process is that the reports will be published online. I think it's a transparent process. Ultimately, it gets voted on by the FIFA Council members, but that'll give us a better steer. The FIFA staff were very professional, so it didn't give away too much, or didn't give away anything really in terms of how they necessarily saw it. But the report will be really interesting, and yeah, we definitely put our best foot forward.
Is that the next step, and when are you expecting to see that report?
Yeah, that's the key next step. Obviously, there's opportunities with various football confederation meetings along the way to keep pushing the key messages of our bid. So we'll continue to do that. But the publication of the reports online at the end of May is really important. So we've sort of watched that space eagerly. And then the decision by the FIFA Council on the 3rd of June.
I know you said they didn't give away much, but how are you feeling, or how's the team feeling in terms of confidence that you might get the nod here with this decision?
Yeah, it's one of those scenarios in which we've done everything we can do, but there's certainly, I guess I'd say anything can happen. But until the FIFA staff finish their tours, obviously they're only part way through. They've only visited Brazil and Colombia and ourselves, and flew to Japan on Saturday. So until that's complete, we won't count any chickens.
And that's New Zealand Football Chief Executive Andrew Pragnell there speaking to Clay Wilson. Let's get to some of your feedback on the Sky Nest. Mixed reviews. This person saying, eek, it would turn into a used love nest. And someone else says, what about the Sky Ouch? I don't know if they purposely left off the C, Sky Couch, or Cuddle Class as it's known. Chance of a cuddle in the nest?
RNZ News at 6. Good evening, I'm Paul Brennan. The local share market has had a third consecutive day of steep losses. The benchmark top 50 index has closed off its lows after recouping some early losses, but still ended down 185 points or 1.6%. Investors have been selling risky assets such as shares because of uncertainty over the impact of the coronavirus outbreak on companies and the world economy. Most local stocks have fallen, with companies exposed to travel and tourism or with direct business ties to China among the hardest hit. US markets were battered as much as 3% lower overnight, and Australia and markets in Asia are also showing hefty falls. Financial markets are expected to remain volatile until there is some clarity about the virus. The US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is alerting Americans to begin preparing for the spread of COVID-19 there after infections surfaced in several more countries. Its head of respiratory diseases, Dr. Nancy Messonnier, says disruption to everyday life might be severe, and businesses, schools and families should begin having discussions about the possible impact. So far, the US has only a few confirmed cases. The number of infections in mainland China has gone over 78,000, with several thousand more in other Asian countries, Europe, the Middle East, Australia and now North Africa. Auckland Arts Festival has cancelled a French show due to the outbreak of COVID-19. The chief executive, David Innes, says the aerial spectacle, Place d'Ange, was hampered by rising air freight costs driven by the virus's global impact. He says the coronavirus has had other financial impacts on the festival too.
We've got the wonderful La Gramée from the San Francisco, Los Angeles Master Chorale coming, which we managed to keep hold of. It was going to Hong Kong Festival, and we were sharing the cost with Hong Kong. Hong Kong Festival got cancelled, so we're now bringing the group directly from Los Angeles to Auckland and back to LA. That obviously has an effect on our costs because we're paying the full airfare now.
David Innes says he doesn't expect any other shows in the Auckland Arts Festival will be cancelled. More than 30,000 New Zealand retirees are getting super while earning more than $100,000 a year, costing taxpayers more than $500 million. Figures released to RNZ show that the number has nearly tripled over the past 10 years, with 2,500 superannuitants on incomes of more than $300,000. Retirement Policy and Research Centre Director Susan St John says hard questions need to be asked about whether that is the best use of taxpayer money. And she says even those figures don't paint the whole picture.
It doesn't count pie income, and it also, of course, doesn't count the capital gains that many in those brackets will have enjoyed. So it's an underestimate of what's going on in terms of where those super payments are going.
Retirement Policy and Research Centre Director Susan St John. A Te Arawa leader is celebrating the return of Lake Okaro in Rotorua to his people. It was announced by the Minister for Māori Crown Relations, Kelvin Davis, at Te Papai Auru Marae in Rotorua. The transfer of the Southern Bay of Plenty Lake to the Te Arawa Lakes Trust is the final part of the Rotorua iwi settlement, which has taken 14 years to enact. But Te Arawa Lakes Trust Chairman, Sir Toby Curtis, says it's not the end, but the beginning.
Now that we're going to have the majority say in the future of the lakes, we are still going to work with our partners and indeed with the Crown to ensure that these iconic jewels in Aotearoa are there for the benefit of everybody.
Sir Toby Curtis says it has brought his people back in connection with their tupuna. A critically injured 4-year-old who was hurt in his Flaxmere home exactly 1 month ago remains in a stable condition in Starship Hospital. No one has been charged or arrested since the boy was found with extensive injuries on January the 29th, but the police say they are engaging well with the boy's extended family. The boy has suffered brain damage, but his immediate family have refused to cooperate with the ongoing police investigation. A Waikato dairy farmer who broke the tails of more than 100 cows has been given home detention and barred from owning animals for 3 years. Glenn Raymond Steiner was sentenced in the Tokoroa District Court today after earlier pleading guilty to one representative charge of the ill treatment of animals. The Ministry for Primary Industries says an inspection of his herd showed more than 150 of the cows' tails were broken in multiple places. It says the injuries would have caused the animals severe pain. The judge says Steiner's actions harmed the reputation of the entire dairy industry. It's coming up to 6:05. On to sport now. Nappy changing rather than following the first test win over India took precedence for Black Caps fast bowler Neil Wagner last week. Wagner has rejoined the side for the second test starting in Christchurch on Saturday, having missed the 10-wicket win in Wellington due to the birth of his daughter Olivia. Wagner says he tried to keep up with what was going on in the match when he could.
I had my phone on Sky Go in the hospital, and then a couple of early mornings just on the record, while doing the old nappy change and burping and being up and awake.
The Black Caps bowler Neil Wagner. Chelsea's Champions League football campaign appears over after they were outclassed 3-0 by Bayern Munich in the last 16 first leg tie at Stamford Bridge. Barcelona grabbed an away goal as they came from behind to draw against Napoli in Italy. Manaki Selby Rickett is set to make his debut for the Highlanders Super Rugby side 3 months after being convicted of assault. The Southland lock has been named in the Highlanders reserves for their match against the Melbourne Rebels in Dunedin on Friday. In November, Selby Rickett was convicted of assault following an incident in Invercargill. And former Silver Fern Kayla Johnson won't play for the New South Wales Swifts in Australia's domestic netball competition this season after announcing she's pregnant with her first child. Formerly Kayla Cullen, the defender was a replacement player late in the Swifts premiership winning campaign last year. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, 40 years of standing still. Canterbury University law professor Elizabeth MacDonald looks at how our court system handles female rape complainants and why that's still putting women off complaining to the police. And then there's the treasure from Rapa Nui, Easter Island, which lay hidden in this country's archives until rediscovered by genetic scientist Lara Shepherd and botanist Carlos Leinbach. On Nights with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7. On RNZ National.
Now the short forecast for Met Service to midnight tomorrow, Thursday. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel Peninsula, Waikato, Waitomo and Taumarunui. Fine but isolated showers tomorrow, mainly inland during the afternoon. For Gisborne, cloudy periods, a few showers. Bay of Plenty, Taupo, Taihape, Manawatu, Hawke's Bay and Tararua District. Generally fine, isolated afternoon and evening showers inland. Taranaki, Whanganui, Horowhenua, Kapiti Coast, Wellington, Wairarapa, also Bulla, Nelson, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, excluding Clutha. Areas of morning and evening cloud, otherwise fine. Westland and Fiordland, cloud increasing, patchy drizzle in Fiordland spreading north overnight and turning to rain tomorrow, with heavy falls south of Otira. Clutha and Southland, fine spells, but isolated showers possible this afternoon, about now. Scattered rain developing tomorrow, briefly heavy in the afternoon. Chatham Islands, partly cloudy with a few showers there tomorrow morning. 7.5 minutes past 6.
Thanks, Paul. If you're just tuning in, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. The coronavirus outbreak is continuing to weigh on global markets. Local economies and the World Health Organization wants it to be top of mind for world leaders. The WHO is concerned countries simply are not prepared for the coronavirus to arrive. The virus is spreading aggressively around the globe with more than 80,000 cases from China to Italy. In Iran, the Deputy Health Minister sweated through a media conference before announcing he had tested positive for the disease. He posted a video online saying he had quarantined himself at home.
I wanted to inform you that I am coronavirus positive. Take care of yourselves. This virus is a democratic virus. It does not differentiate between the rich and the poor or officials and non-officials. Anyone could get it.
In the Spanish island of Tenerife, a hotel was put in lockdown after a visiting Italian doctor tested positive for the disease. The BBC's Mark Lowen reports.
From island haven to health scare lockdown,
Italy's coronavirus outbreak has spread to Tenerife. The Costa Adeje Palace Hotel now shut off after an Italian guest, a doctor, tested positive. They woke up to this, ordered to stay put. Hundreds stuck inside.
We just got to stay in the hotel. We can't leave the hotel. We can walk around the grounds, sit on the sun lounges, but there's a cordon around the hotel with the police.
In Italy itself, cases are still rising. It's Europe's worst affected country, and in Milan, they're not taking any chances. Pharmacies across the city have the same sign. We've run out of masks and sanitizing gel. Among the places closed, La Scala Opera has been silenced, a blow for Alan and Mary Spencer, who came from Somerset to enjoy a Verdi classic.
Well, we were disappointed because we had made plans to visit so many places in Milan for the first time, and all of them are closed.
Under new British government rules, if they show symptoms after going home, they'd have to self-isolate for 2 weeks.
We feel we're most at threat, perhaps during our return journey, when we will be in contact with other people travelling by train and by plane. Until then, we feel comfortable and safe here.
One of Italy's key concerns now is the economic impact of the virus. With sites closed, tourists cancelling and businesses suffering, there's talk of it tipping into recession. And until they can stem the outbreak, the EU's third largest economy will feel the shock. Prime people-watching spots are virtually people-free. Cafes count their losses. Gabriele Gerosa says it's the worst he's seen in years. Milan is suffering a psychosis. People are scared and aren't going out. A world of easy travel has met a virus that knows no borders. Italy's battle is proving heavier than most, but the front line of the fight keeps moving.
And that was Mark Lowen reporting. The coronavirus outbreak is threatening to ruin the Olympics in Japan and has already disrupted Kiwi athletes' preparations for the Games. Senior International Olympic Committee member Dick Pound says today that a decision will have to be made around late May as to whether the virus is sufficiently under control for the event to go ahead or if it'll have to be cancelled. New Zealand's Olympic Committee is closely monitoring the situation as thousands of athletes hope that the years of training they've put in haven't been in vain. Matthew Tunison reports.
With less than 5 months to go until the Tokyo Olympics, some Kiwi athletes have had their meticulously planned preparations derailed due to the coronavirus, which has now killed over 2,600 people. The World Athletics Indoor Championships, due to be held in March, were cancelled due to the outbreak. This was a major part of the build-up to the Olympics for athletes including shot-putters Dame Valerie Adams and Madison Lee Vescher, as well as middle-distance runner Nick Willis. And a 9-strong New Zealand boxing team had been due to take part in a qualifying event in China, but that was rescheduled to be held in Jordan. The team are currently in Italy, where there have now been 11 coronavirus deaths, and coach Billy Meehan fears that Jordan may close its borders to people travelling from Italy.
We've just got to be a bit mindful that if Jordan start closing their borders to anybody out of Italy, we might be in trouble. And we're a bit stuck in a rock and a hard place. I mean, the last thing we want to do is pack up out of another camp and disappear again. We really need to try and follow this one through, get to Jordan and get the job done.
Table tennis, cycling and para-swimming events have also been cancelled. Speaking to the Associated Press earlier today, Senior International Olympic Committee member Dick Pound said a decision on whether or not to cancel the Tokyo Games will need to be made in the next 3 months or so.
At a certain point, you have to make a call, and then I'd say over the next 2 or 3 months, it's going to be like focusing a ground glass lens. The focus will get sharper and sharper as you get to the point of go or no go.
If the event doesn't go ahead, Mr. Pound said it will likely be cancelled rather than postponed or moved to another city. New Zealand Olympic Committee spokesperson Ashley Abbott says they're closely monitoring the situation and trying to help athletes whose preparations have been impacted.
Things are moving really fast, and our job at the moment is working with athletes on the crucial qualification period that takes place now. We're seeing actually athletes having to have their competitions moved or postponed because of the virus, and so that's an immediate area of focus for us.
However, Ms Abbott says that as it stands, the 2020 Tokyo Olympics are still going ahead and athletes are training accordingly.
We are working towards the Games taking place, and what we need to do is understand the environment our athletes will be facing come Games time and take advice and work closely with the New Zealand government here just to make sure that our plans and processes are such that our athletes will be safe.
Meanwhile, Australia's Olympic officials will meet Thursday to advise athletes about the coronavirus and adjust their schedules to keep them out of harm's way. But it's the Chinese Olympic team who've been by far the hardest hit. Many athletes have been confined to closed training bases, and some of those who've been competing abroad have decided not to go home to avoid being caught up in the travel restrictions imposed on China. And Europe's football governing body, UEFA, says it's monitoring the spread of the virus ahead of the Euro 2020 tournament. A cancelled Olympics would be the first in modern history outside of wartime. In Auckland, call Matthew Tunison, TNA.
And some of you have been getting in touch about the story earlier in the program from Alex Perrottet and our cameraman Nick Munro, who went down Dominion Road at lunchtime, and a number of the particularly Chinese restaurants were virtually empty in a lot of cases. This from GT, who says Chinese and other Asian restaurants are being boycotted, but despite hundreds of cases of the virus in Italy, no mention of a boycott of Italian or other European restaurants. Smells like old-fashioned racism to me. And Elizabeth has got in touch to say, "Hi Lisa, my hubby and I are having Chinese takeaway for dinner tonight. They do great fish and chips there too. It's our local and we love the food." Good on you, Elizabeth. Let's head to the US now. News of Harvey Weinstein's conviction continues to reverberate around Hollywood. The former film producer was taken to hospital yesterday complaining about chest pain. He's been found guilty of rape and sexual assault and faces a maximum 29 years in jail. Prominent actors have weighed in, saying the Watershed case sets an important precedent for women who've accused powerful men of sexual misconduct. The ABC's Eleanor Whitehead reports.
The verdict was a milestone for the Me Too movement, and in Hollywood, actors are focused on what comes next.
I think that just opened the dikes.
That's Sigourney Weaver, the star of the Alien movies.
And I think that the support women are giving women now, for the most part, it's just the way it should be. You know, it's connecting all of us in all these different countries and all these different fields to work together to support each other and not back down and not wait for your turn. I think we've waited long enough.
And here's Andy McDowell from 4 Weddings and a Funeral.
I think it's an important verdict. I'm sad because it's of what he did and disappointed that this is his history, but we have to make changes for women, and it's got to start somewhere.
Former US presidential candidate Hillary Clinton says Harvey Weinstein's conviction for rape and sexual assault should put an end to, quote, the kind of behaviour that he was just convicted for.
Well, I think that the jury's verdict really speaks for itself. And it is obviously something that people have looked at and followed because it was time for an accounting.
Even US President Donald Trump's weighed in.
I think that from the standpoint of women, I think it was a great thing. It was a great victory and sends a very strong message.
Mr. Weinstein was supposed to be locked up in Rikers Island jail by now. But instead, the former Hollywood producer is in a nearby hospital after the ambulance carrying him to the notorious jail was diverted. He'd complained of heart palpitations. His defence lawyer, Arthur Aidala, says he's doing fine.
To me, he looked like he was in good shape. Obviously, for any human being, yesterday was a tremendously jarring and shocking event. It's no secret many of you were at the court and saw he's not the picture of health by any stretch of the imagination.
He says Mr. Weinstein, who still denies the charges, was flabbergasted by the verdict and told him, quote, I'm innocent. How can this happen in America?
All he asked was that we continue, meaning the legal team, to continue to go out there and proclaim his innocence and to use all of the tools that the criminal justice system gives us to make sure that justice is done.
Mr. Weinstein faces up to 29 years in prison and is due to be sentenced next month.
And that's Eleanor Whitehead. Warning, recycling habits are proving dangerous in the big smoke and someone could get seriously hurt. Gas canisters, lighter fluid cans and car parts biffed in the rubbish are the main suspects in a spate of recent recycled truck fires in Auckland. Council's General Manager of Waste Solutions, Parul Sood, is worried our slack habits are putting us at risk.
It's a big problem because these products then get into the recycling truck and we've got a compaction method in the truck and that creates a fire. It's literally that, and then that burns down all the product that's in there. If you catch it, you do catch it at the time when it started, but however, it's kind of ruined the product that's in the recycling bin, in the recycling truck.
And how many of these have you had recently and how serious were they?
Oh, God. We've had 3 fires in the last 3 weeks, which is quite a lot. I mean, even one is too much, but just last 3 weeks it's been crazy. So we've had one in Linfield, one in Otara, and the most recent was on Monday in Sunnynook. And we've got the fire and emergency crew coming down and helping us with that. But, there could be one that goes wrong one day and it can be a real serious problem.
So how do you deal with that? How do they put out a fire inside a truck? Do you have to pull all the material out? How does it work?
Yep, so they have to literally take it all out, and they obviously look for a safe place to do that. And then you've got the fire and emergency guys coming and hosing it down. So they've got special procedures to make sure it's in a safe place and it's actually, the fire's put out.
So what are these high-risk things that people are chucking out in their general rubbish that are causing the fires?
So I guess something that we need to be mindful of is what does go in your recycling bin. It definitely is not batteries and acids and gas cylinders. So the couple of things that we've found recently that have gone into the recycling trucks that are causing these fires are the last one that we found was actually a gas cylinder. You also put an Xbox console, and I guess that's a little bit of wish cycling, maybe thinking that it's going to get picked out, but it doesn't. And they have lithium-ion batteries in them, which creates the fire.
So where are we supposed to put all of those things? The old Xbox, the gas cylinder, anything that could cause a fire. What are we supposed to do with those things?
So if you've got an Xbox that works, just think about your neighbor, think about somebody else who might be able to use it, or there might be some charity organizations that might take it if it is in a usable condition. If not, you do have specialist electronic waste collectors who actually take it away and then dismantle it. So you need to just look up on our website. We've got information. If you put in a specific type of thing and you ask in terms of what do I do with it, it gives you options of where those providers might be.
So what's your worst fear here? That one of these trucks is going to, explode and someone's going to be injured?
Absolutely. I mean, that is my biggest fear. It is, if you don't catch it in time, what could it do to the truck? And that's obviously a big health and safety risk for our driver. But also if you think about where it is and if it does explode or if it does have that big fire element to it, it could actually have an impact on the passerbys, on pedestrians or anything around the truck. So it is a big risk.
Are we still putting a bunch of things in recycling bins that we shouldn't?
You'll be surprised, yes, we are, which is very unfortunate because I think sometimes people are either confused in terms of not knowing what goes where.
Or are they just lazy, Parul? Are they just lazy?
I was going to say that sometimes the things that we get in the bins and you think, this surely isn't for recycling and you're being lazy and you're not just paying attention. So that is an element as well. So I think we've got people who do the right thing and they're very diligent with what goes into the recycling bins. Then there are others who may be a little confused, and I've got some friends who are like that. But then there are others who actually sometimes just don't care, and that's not right.
So is there a fire alarm inside the truck, or how does the driver even know that they've got problems in the back and the compactor?
So they do have some, they have got sensors that would tell you, but they also are aware of the smoke that starts coming out as well. So, they've got elements of sensors and cameras which can actually alert you to that.
And in terms of finding the cause, I imagine that's a bit of a mission. Do you have to sift through all of this stuff?
Yeah, and that's quite hard because, as you can imagine, the fire catches, because you've got plastics and paper in the mix, and plastic can get quite, it just melts the whole product down. And sometimes we are able to isolate what the problem is, and sometimes we can't really figure out what actually started the fire.
And what happens with all that material that's been involved in the fire? Can it go on and be recycled, or what happens to it?
Absolutely not. So anything which is in the truck while it catches fire, we have to dispose of to landfill. You just can't recycle it anymore. And that's a waste of, sometimes up to 6 tons of product that we've collected, that you and I have sorted at our house carefully, and then it's gone into a truck where somebody has put the wrong item in it, and it has started the fire, and it melts all of the material that's next to it, and it has to go to landfill. You just can't do anything with it. We need to remember what our recycling bins are for. They are for packaging containers that come out of your laundry, your bathroom, and your kitchen. They're not meant for general waste, and they're not meant for electronics for sure.
That's Parul Sood. A network of gun emplacements used to keep out a Japanese invasion during World War II have been given a new lease on life. The concrete bunkers and underground ammunition rooms at the entry to Littleton Harbour were badly damaged during the 2011 quakes and heavily tagged, but are now back in fighting form. Conan Young went to the official reopening.
The location of the guns at Godley Head provides magnificent views of the Pacific Ocean, with Banks Peninsula's many bays to the south and the beaches of East Christchurch stretching out to the north. At the height of the war, this was home to 2,000 army personnel, ready and waiting for the Japanese Navy to appear over the horizon. They slept in their clothes so they could quickly man their posts. The Godley Head Heritage Trust Chair, Peter Wilkins, says this included a large number of the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps.
They were running out of men. We kept sending them overseas, they kept getting killed and wounded, and we kept sending more till we started to run out of men. And the women were really keen. Women's liberation didn't start in the 70s, it started in the Second War. They came in here, they ran the camp, they plotted the guns, they spotted, they ran the radar.
Peter Wilkins says the 3 huge Vickers guns were long ago cut up and sold for scrap to, ironically, Japan. But he says the restored emplacements will ensure this history is never forgotten.
You can tell people somebody was here, this was done there, but put up a lump of concrete this size in front of them, it has majesty, it has presence.
The Department of Conservation has led the $440,000 project. Its operations manager, Andy Thompson, says the damage from the quakes was extensive.
There was cliff shear, so portions of the cliffs fell away. Just making sure that the headland wasn't advancing toward the coast, and that we weren't going to see the whole headland eventually fall into the sea. And the third area of concern was around the structural integrity of the buildings themselves.
A large chunk of the restoration involved removing the screeds of tagging that had built up after years of neglect. Andy Thompson says one strategy to prevent the taggers returning was to employ street artist Wongi Wilson to paint 2 giant murals.
The tactic was really inspired by a piece of graffiti art that was already here by a graffiti artist who painted a soldier sitting down having a smoke with a line underneath it, Lest We Forget, a really great tribute. And the taggers left that alone for a long, long time. They wouldn't go near it.
Wongi Wilson teamed up with the Heritage Trust's Peter Wilkins for inspiration.
He just came forward with a whole bunch of different photos and I kind of just got him to send me through as much as he could. But yeah, extremely amazingly lucky to have these photos of the actual people from this era. They're able to actually look and recognise and acknowledge the specific people in these photos.
While Wongi Wilson's work is often used as a way to discourage tagging, he's reluctant to criticise those responsible for leaving their mark on public property.
I understand how people, don't like tagging, but for me it's the beginning of it, really. Without me dabbling in that as a kid, I wouldn't be doing what I do now. So, and it's all a progression. You progress through stages, and you learn and you get better as you learn.
DOC is hoping the restored emplacements will provide another drawcard for an area that already attracts 100,000 visitors a year. Kei Ototahi Aho, mō te hōtaka o te ahi, ko Conan Young tēnei.
An enormous amount of feedback tonight. Let's try and get through as much as possible on the Sky Nest, which is the lie-down economy bed that Air New Zealand is trialling. This person says, as someone who spent days on end in a very small mountain tent, lying in a space that size is way more comfortable than sitting. Another person says, Air New Zealand Sky Bed, bigger than a yoga mat, have had some very good sleeps on those. Another one says, the crucial measurement missing is height. And you're right, they haven't given that one out. That is what will lead to claustrophobia and provide info on whether you can sit up. They have confirmed you won't be able to sit up. You're supposed to go back to your chair if you want to sit up. Graham says, who's the poor attendant who has to wake up the sleeper after an hour or two and tell him they have to go back to their seat? Paddy, though, would pay up to $500 extra to have a Sky Nest. Not sure how that compares with premium. Paddy says, I have flown business class only once. The extra service was nice, but to be honest, the thing that was totally worth the money was being able to lie completely flat. Colleen says, the Nest sounds ideal for me. I'd hire one. I could stretch out for a sleep. I'd pay more than economy, but not premium economy rates. Another person says, give me a Sky Nest, please. Multiple E's. I dread flying so much I can't sleep lying down and I'm beside myself with tiredness as a result. If I could have a wee nest to lie in, it would make me 100% more likely to travel long distance. On the issue of super and people collecting over $100,000 a year in income still getting the pension/benefit, Muriel, I think your caps lock is stuck on. Muriel's got in touch to say super is not a benefit, or all capital letters. It was compulsorily taken when we started work at age 15, have worked and saved for our old age. It actually comes under the Ministry of Social Development and is classified as a universal benefit. Someone else says, greedy bloody boomers again, not happy with pillaging New Zealand for the last 30 years. They're still sucking the country dry. That's cheery. Catch you all tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The local share market has had a third consecutive day of steep losses due to uncertainty over the impact of the coronavirus outbreak on the economy. And the Auckland Arts Festival has cancelled a French show due to the outbreak, which was hampered by rising air freight costs. The Mayor of Arrowtown, which at times has some of Australasia's worst air pollution, is supporting a proposal to phase out high-emitting coal and wood burners. And Kaitaia could be waiting up to 16 days before getting any water from the Aupori aquifer. Those are the headlines. Our next news will be at 7, and then it's Nights with Brian Crump.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
I think it's a complex verdict, so findings of guilty on some charges and not guilty on the more serious charges suggests that the jury had a hard time.
Live with local, national and international stories and some music with your news. What kind of band are you in?
Oh,